This is The Cross Section with Nate Lull and David Edelstein. Featuring special guest, New York State Public High School Athletic Association Executive Director, Dr. Robert Zayas.
So it's good to have you on the cross section, and it's been a while since you and I did actually speak last. I've been following all the moves with the Cubs, like I emailed you, and as a Mets fan, obviously I'm excited about the Mets moves, but I'm pretty worried about the Cubs. Just glad I'm not in the NL Central with the Cubs. I mean, the Cubs getting Jock Peterson, but also the Cardinals and everything. So I was curious how you're feeling about that with baseball starting later this month, finally.
Well, I mean, my family has been Cubs fans for decades. And, just to see the Cubs win the World Series was a phenomenal experience. I have an uncle that lives in Wales. My father lives in Texas. My brother lives in Texas. So, we're passionate Cubs fans. I don't, unfortunately, get to follow them as close as I would like to, just because of everything else going on. But it is nice to see the Cubs doing so well after their extended drought as an organization.
It's got to be pretty cool now that I'm thinking about it for you specifically as someone who's the leader of an association where student athletes often wind up being coaches back of their teams. I've covered a few stories now where student athletes from schools in the area are now the coaches of their varsity teams and high school and everything. And to see a guy like David Ross become the manager of the Cubs after being a player, that's got to resonate a little differently for someone who sees this on the high school level frequently.
Yeah, now I'm a big Ryan Sandberg fan, so I was thinking that Sandberg was going to get the opportunity to lead the Cubs, but certainly excited that Ross got the call. And just his playing experience. I think he brings a different atmosphere to the clubhouse with the Cubs. So that's been fun to see how he's interacted with the players. And it's just a cool experience to be able to see the Cubs doing so well.
Yeah, it's like I'll say about the Mets, like in 2015, it was a weird experience to see the Cubs doing so well. As you know, then beating the Cubs, but the Cubs the next year winning the World Series. So one step further than New York got. So like we were just saying a second ago, actually, people see you often in these short sound bites throughout all of the announcements that go out, the press releases and all the decisions. But I know from having the opportunity to speak with you on occasion is that there's a lot more that goes into it than just the 90-second stories that someone like me can put on television. And so that's why I and Nate, who got called into last-minute league meetings in Section 4 right before this, because everything's changing so quickly, that's why we're so grateful that you took the opportunity to be here. And I wanted to just start, by the way, by letting you know that we had NFHS President Dr. Krista Niehoff on here a few months ago, which was also a phenomenal opportunity to get to speak with her. And she spoke a lot about you and called you a rock star. I was curious whether you think that's a fitting description.
I don't know if rock star is a fitting description, but I know Dr. Niehoff really well. She was the executive director in Connecticut when I first started here in New York, and I got to know Dr. Niehoff during my time also when I was at the New Mexico High School Athletic Association. So I don't know if rock star would be a fair characterization. My wife may agree or disagree, I should say, along with my daughters. But I do appreciate the compliments that Dr. Niehoff gives. I just try to work hard. And I think, with my work with the NFHS, it's nice to see that that's recognized.
What is the state association's relationship with the NFHS in from your perspective as the leader of the association, just to connect those dots for people who might have.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that the NFHS exists. Some people may not even know that the New York State Public High School Athletic Association exists or what our role is. But the NFHS is the national governing body for all high school athletics and fine arts throughout the entire country. So they're based in Indianapolis. We work very closely with them in the creation of rules and regulations that we play by for our sports. Now, some sports here in New York, we do not abide by the NFHS rules, most notably girls basketball and volleyball and softball. We abide by other governing bodies' rules. That was a long discussion going back years since my tenure began here in New York. But for the most part, we abide by the NFHS rules. And I also get the opportunity to do a lot of work with the NFHS on various committees. So right now I'm serving on the NFHS Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. I represent the northeastern part of the United States and the Midwest. I've served on the Publications Committee. I've served on the Citizenship Committee. So I've done a lot of work with the NFHS, and it's nice to be able to have a voice at that national level.
I think those are all qualifications that go into the title of rock star. It seems to me. One thing that I don't think a lot of people get the sense of, because it's not always the breaking news, is what your position actually entails with the New York State Public High School Athletic Association as its executive director. But I want to kind of work toward that just a little bit by asking a little bit about your background, so that people can get to know who you are a little bit. Who is this person? Because I'm sure they've heard your name a lot. They see you real quick on TV or on Nate Lull's podcast. But who is the person actually, being part of those decisions? Like I said, Nate and I were talking actually earlier today about how, well-spoken you are. And we were wondering where your education is and your background in both sports and administration, and maybe even some PR there, being able to be so good at that, that led you to where you are now.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I'm an educator at heart. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. Went to college, had the opportunity to run cross country and track at a small Division II school out in East Texas. Got a degree in education and history, and had the privilege of teaching and coaching for 3 years in Central Texas before going out to Albuquerque, New Mexico to pursue a master's degree in sports administration. And, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time in the early part of 2002, and started off as a communications coordinator for the New Mexico Activities Association, ultimately worked my way up to associate director. And then in the fall of 2012, the executive director position in New York opened up. At that point in time, I was trying to finish up my PhD at the University of New Mexico in sports administration, and convinced my wife and 2 daughters, who were very young at the time, that it'd be a good idea to move to upstate New York. We had never been here before, didn't know anyone, but got the opportunity. And when you're one of 51 executive directors throughout the country, at that time, I was the youngest executive director in the country. So it was a great opportunity. And I feel like my family and I have taken full advantage of the opportunity. And it's just been a great experience to be able to come into a state that really I had no contacts, didn't know anyone for the first few years. Every single meeting I walked into was new faces, and just trying to introduce myself and really my philosophy on putting kids first and trying to make decisions that really focuses on what's in the best interest of our student athletes, and to be able to provide them with a great participation experience is something that I've always focused upon. But just a little bit about me. I have, wonderful wife and extremely supportive, and 2 young daughters that are now 10 and 13. They're involved in sports. And I would say that my wife is the better athlete in the family. If my kids get any athleticism from either of us, it's definitely from my wife, who played Division I softball.
Oh, wow. And where did she play?
At the University of New Mexico.
Okay. Very cool. So coming from New Mexico and Texas, was the snow? How much was the snow a warm welcome, or not?
It's interesting, because one of the aspects I typically leave out of the story, though, is that I was born in Bangor, Maine. So I have a twin brother. We were born in Maine. Didn't live there very long. My father was in the Air Force, so before we even started grade school, we moved to San Antonio, Texas, and then moved back to Maine. Ultimately lived in Ankara, Turkey for about 3 years. My father was stationed there, and then ended up back in San Antonio, Texas. But yeah, I mean, I think the snow was something that I was looking forward to. I still enjoy it. It's been about a decade I did shovel my driveway, let's see, a couple mornings ago, and I was maybe regretting the decision a little bit after shoveling for an hour, but I still enjoy the snowfall and, just being able to experience the four seasons. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, beautiful weather where we lived. I had the opportunity to live there for a decade, but you don't get the four seasons like you do here in New York.
You could have at least chosen Southern New York. As a person who's from basically Southern New York, the Rockland County area, because I'm from Northern New Jersey, at least we get a little bit less snow than at least where I am here in Utica. The few, what is it, latitude lines too high for having, maybe it's like we have 3.5 seasons instead of 4 because of
I agree with that.
The length of the winter. But that's actually pretty interesting. And you spoiled my final question that I was going to have for you, which was about your twin brother, because someone gave me insight on that yesterday. And I was going to ask you, either, I don't know if you're identical twins or not, but who's better looking, if that was the case, or I was going to ask you, who's the better athlete, or, if you were wearing the same clothes, could people tell you apart? But you spoiled the reason why that question would have been fun at the end. So
yeah, a lot of people don't realize I do have a twin brother. We're identical. Now that I do have a beard, we tend to look a little more alike than what people would think. But I would think if my brother walked into any meeting here in New York for a few minutes at least, people may look and say, "Is that really Robert?" But after a while, I think you'd be able to tell the difference. But I don't think we look anything alike, even though we're identical. But a lot of people have the sense that they can't tell us apart.
So it sounds to me like you are obviously passionate about what you do, but do you ever think of switching with him for a day with all of this? Like just calling him up and saying, "Hey, you want to just run this one meeting, please?"
No, I don't think so. He's in estimating and construction, and his job has a lot to do with Excel spreadsheets and numbers and figures, and I'd rather deal with the challenges that we have rather than trying to figure out what he's doing on a daily basis.
I can imagine, though, sometimes going to school as kids, you might have wanted to, do that whole classroom swap thing.
I'm not saying it never happened, but that was something that we'll leave for another interview.
Yeah, we're not going to publicly recommend this to the high schoolers who may or may not be watching right now to attempt if they're identical twins. But like you just said, obviously it seems like you're passionate about your job and that you enjoy these challenges, even though clearly there have been challenges this past year and a half that no one could have expected. Like you said, one of the greatest 15-second sound bites that I've ever had from you, because I put it in a story, was that this was the single greatest challenge that you had experienced in your position. But why is this the job for you? Like, why was being an executive director of the New York State Public High School Athletic Association the job that Rob Zayas needed to be in?
Well, I just think, to have the opportunity to impact so many student athletes was something that really enticed me to apply for this position. In New Mexico, we were working on behalf of 150 schools and about 80,000 student athletes. When you get the opportunity to come to a state the size of New York with almost 600,000 student athletes and about 800 schools, was just something that I really wanted to take advantage of, and I really wanted to challenge myself. And I hope that people would perceive that what I brought to New York has been beneficial. And I don't ever anticipate, nor do I ever expect everybody to agree with everything that we're doing as a high school athletic association. And that's probably just because a lot of people don't truly understand what we do or how we come to the decisions that we do, and how challenging and how difficult some of these decisions have had to be over the course of the last 10 months, where, I'm finding myself waking up at 2:00 in the morning, really debating upon what we're doing and how we're doing it and trying to figure things out. And I know the 11 section executive directors have been in the same exact position that I've been in, where we, discuss things and really try to make sure that we analyze all aspects of a situation before a decision's ever made. And I think, sometimes there's so much misinformation and so many misconceptions out there about how we're deciding upon, for example, the decision that was made yesterday to cancel the spring state championships. That was not done quickly. It was not done with a lot of debate and without a lot of examination, but it was one that we listened to the member schools, we listened to the membership, and we listened to their concerns. And we also made sure, and this is one thing that I hope that people can see in what I try to bring to this position every day, is we put the students first, and we try to make decisions that are in the best interest of those student athletes. We don't worry about what's in the best interest of college scholarships, because I firmly believe we're preparing students through their participation for the next level of their life, not the next level of competition or participation. But when we really look at what's in the best interest of student athletes, the decision that was made yesterday is a perfect example of that. I'd much rather give student athletes the opportunity to participate in 18 or 19 baseball games during the regular season this spring than participate in 10 or 11 and then have the opportunity to go on and contend for a state championship with some of those challenges that we're now faced with as a result of the COVID crisis.
You mentioned a bunch of things there. First of all, I think that it reminds me of the quote that I think my parents always used to say to me about people, which is, if everyone agreed, or if you have two people and both of them agree on everything all the time, one of them's not needed. So, there are a lot of different opinions that you get. I think, is it 705 or 755 schools that you're kind of the overseer of?
786 schools that we work on.
So when you have 786 different schools and the 11 sections, just 11 section executive directors together, I imagine, bring different ideas to the table. But I imagine for you, that's the point. You want all of these different ideas to be able to get the best informed about how people are thinking and then make the ultimate best decision.
Most certainly. And I hope that people see that I'm accessible. I put my cell phone number on our website. I want to hear from people. I want to listen to their concerns. I want to have the opportunity to really examine and analyze all different points of a situation before we're making a decision on behalf of so many student athletes and so many schools. So I hope that people see that we're listening and we're paying attention to the needs of our member schools, even when we're not in the midst of a global pandemic, but certainly when we've been dealing with this crisis, is that we are truly listening to what our schools are asking for. It may not be that the parents understand it or an individual coach here and there understands it, but we are listening to the membership.
On a slightly different topic, but related, and it is great that you just reminded me of this, is about the college scholarships. Because I know that one of the main things that I see people putting on social media, because nowadays, one of the great things about technology is we're all connected. And so sometimes it gives me questions to ask in a press conference, and sometimes you could see where some of the community's thoughts are when they're thinking about different decisions. And it's one of those perspectives that's added to the table that you consider. But you worded it just now as that you're not worried about preparing them for the next level of competition necessarily, but you're worried more about preparing them for the next level of life and bringing those the life lessons that come from sport and participation at the high school level into all of the students' life. And obviously the skills will be built for those who will move on, but that moving on with the college scholarship is not the number one top goal of the priority when looking at these health decisions you're making right now. I just want to dig into that for a quick second because of how many people have mentioned it online. Why can you explain and elaborate just on that balance that you have to make? Because obviously the way that the students do get college scholarships and opportunities, which is connected to sometimes their financial ability to attend college, or if their intentions to play professionally in the future, actually starts with their participation at the high school varsity level. So how do you balance that? Because I just imagine that that obviously there's importance there, but obviously there's so many things that are important right now.
Yeah, we have to be aware that certainly students are gaining incredible participation opportunities that are leading to them having the ability to have college scholarships. But the reality with the way that club sports and travel sports have really now almost to some degree have really consumed the recruiting process at the collegiate level. I mean, we'd be naive to think that a college coach is going to show up to our basketball state championships looking for a student to potentially recruit, when that college basketball coach has the ability to go to Las Vegas in the summer, or Dallas, or Indianapolis, or anywhere up and down the East Coast when you have these major club tournaments. And instead of hoping to find one potential Division I prospect at the New York State Public High School Athletic Association state championships, that college coach can go to any one of these youth or travel or AAU tournaments and find 200 or 300 or 400 kids that are capable of playing at the D1 level. So that's something that I think is a misconception, that we have college coaches that are just showing up to random gyms in central New York looking for that diamond in the rough. I've been doing this for now, I'm going on 20 years, and very seldom do we have college coaches that show up to our tournaments if they haven't already identified that talent in that student athlete. But you're correct, is the participation that these students are getting at the high school level is preparing them to potentially play at the college level. But we can't make decisions that are in the best interest of the top 5% of kids in the state. I mean, we have to make sure that we're making decisions across the board that are impacting 100% of the student athletes. And I don't want it to seem that we're not excited or we're not preparing these kids to have the ability to have college scholarships. But at the end of the day, that's not our focus. I'm more concerned with, are these students learning about responsibility and about respect and about fairness and about time management from their coaches that are also educators? That's my concern as the executive director of this association, is that after that student shoots their final free throw or runs their final race, what kind of a person are they going to be? And did they become better? And are they more prepared for college? Are they more prepared for the workforce by participating in sports, rather than are they more prepared to play at the Division II level in the sport of volleyball or basketball? I think, participation prepares us for so many things in life that I think sometimes it's almost taken for granted of all the wonderful benefits that a young person gets from having the ability to participate. And that's been a concern of mine as we've had sports on hold for, in some cases, almost a year now, is sports benefit students. And if they're not participating, what has been happening during this extended layoff?
And it's an interesting differentiation that you make too about the state specifically, because obviously in a moment I want to ask you just a few questions about how it played out with this decision that came yesterday, which we're recording on February 4th. So it was on February 3rd to cancel the New York State Public High School Athletic Association state championships, which obviously still means that there's room for the sections to do what they want, leagues, have sectionals even. And you're making the differentiation that decision of canceling states shouldn't really be viewed as anything that would affect a scholarship opportunity, because that's the state tournament itself is such a small part compared to the whole season that hopefully they get to play. I wonder what your thoughts are too on the general debate that's gone back and forth between, on one side, I guess you could put having to not play sports because of the spread of the coronavirus and wanting to keep everyone safe and deciding that the best decision to stop the spread and prevent people from getting sick and potentially, worse than sick, is to not play on one side. And then on the other side saying, well, if they don't play then my student or my teammate or me or my kid won't be able to even show any of their skills, let alone in the state tournament, if they're not playing whatsoever.
No, I don't want anyone to think that the state championships don't mean something, because if you're a track and field athlete, to have that on your resume, to be able to say you're a New York State champion in the 1,500 meters certainly carries weight and certainly raises your stock when it comes to applying for schools and getting recognition. Same thing in a sport like golf. To be able to say you're the New York State boys or girls golf champion is an incredible accomplishment. So I don't want to take anything away from that. But what I'm saying is right now, the focus has to be on maximum participation, because we're getting ready to try to put 3 seasons essentially into a 4-month time period. So how can we best maximize participation for these student athletes? How can we best get them back into their friend groups and back working with their interscholastic coach and back into participation and back into some sense of normalcy where they have a time schedule to abide by, and they're not just going to school virtually and then Snapchatting with friends or on TikTok or YouTube in the afternoons. I'm really excited that these students are going to have the opportunity to get back into practice sessions and back into some type of game setting, much more so than can we provide them a state championship opportunity? Because when you look at the state championship opportunities, that's for a few select schools in New York State. My focus right now, and I hope it's the focus of our membership, is maximum participation for these student athletes to get them back. And state championships will eventually return. But right now, I think the focus has to be on regular season participation.
And, to your credit, I know that every single time I've spoken with you, whether it's in the press conference or in a one-on-one opportunity, that has kind of been your guiding principle is how do we get the maximum participation? How do we get the safest participation and benefit what's best for the student athletes, and making sure they're safe and able to participate. And that's kind of, I lead leadership programs for high school students across the country, and we always talk about finding your purpose, and I'm sure that's kind of having its moment right now in American culture. I feel like finding your purpose, finding your why, and all that. And you've clearly from the beginning as a leader established your purpose and vision for how the decisions were going to be made, and what would be the first question you asked to see whether it was the right decision or not is what's best for the students overall and getting them back to participation in a safe way. Which
and by no means do I expect everybody to agree with that philosophy. There's a lot of coaches, a lot of parents that completely disagree, and that's fine. I have no problem with the criticism. I have no problem with people disagreeing. But when I work with the 11th section executive directors and I work with the leadership of our association, there's a certain philosophy that I hope that I bring, and there's a certain mindset that I hope that we abide by. And so if you disagree, I'm sorry, but we're moving forward with what's in the best interest and with the direction and input from our member schools.
I feel like one of the hardest parts of this is that there are only 4 years of high school. And so any given year, last year, this year, any change is to a single season is literally 25% of a student athlete's time. And I mean, I've spoken with so many of the student athletes and heard their gratitude for playing the fall season here in Section 3 for those that did. And I can understand the disappointment they feel when things are getting changed, because, if this was something that everyone was just part of and we said, okay, we're going to do what we need to do, and in 2 years, we'll just get back to hopefully by then or even sooner, something that looks really normal and just this is behind us. I think that's easier to digest than when we all realize maybe it was someone's senior season, or maybe it was, their junior and senior season. All of a sudden 2 years are mixed up, and that's kind of the end of it. So I feel like that definitely these are tough decisions that you're making. And I know that we all give you credit for literally working every day or at 2 a.m. That's only when I should be awake after finishing at the 11:30 end for the 11 o'clock newscast. You should not be awake at 2 a.m. making those decisions. But it just shows how much thought you're really putting into this and how much you really almost feel like emotionally connected to getting it right.
That's so true, because some of the decisions that have had to be made over the course of the past 10 months have been devastating. And when you sit back and realize what we had to decide yesterday, or some of the decisions that have had to be made as a result of this crisis that we're dealing with, it's disheartening, because you realize just how many kids are being impacted in a negative way, how many opportunities are being taken away. And to realize that is happening, and it's happening for over 500,000 students that want to just play basketball or just play football or just participate in the sport of volleyball. It's challenging. And that's the reason why we put so much time and effort into every single decision. And again, I don't expect people to understand what goes into every decision. I don't even expect people to accept every decision as that's just the way it is. But I do try to make sure that people understand that these decisions are being made with a great deal of thought and a great deal of examination.
I also want to throw in there too that in this world of technology where everyone can, see everything online and then comment, and I mean, I know that you and Chris Watson, the director of communications for the state association, are constantly posting meeting agendas and, here are the notes and here live tweeting the decisions. Like that's something that's still, I mean, the grand scheme of things, relatively new for people to have that kind of direct access to literally what decision was just made in the executive meeting. Like they barely even need me anymore as the middle person. You just give them the direct, the 100, 240 characters of what's happening directly. But I have to wonder whether you almost appreciate all of the different perspectives. It must feel like a lot of pressure. So I'm wondering what it feels like for you when you have all these different thoughts from not only your, executives talking to you, but the general population and schools and leagues and everyone. So what it feels like, but also I wonder how much you appreciate too, just how actively engaged people are and how much they want to be, because the alternative is that they just don't care. And I wonder if that's worse.
No, I think it's beneficial to see how many different perspectives are out there. And it is beneficial to see the passion and enthusiasm that people have for high school sports. So one may look at it and say, well, you sent out a tweet and you had 200 people that were upset about the decision that you made, or the state association, I should say, had to make. How bad is that? And on one side, yeah, you could look at it from the negative, or you could say, this is great. This is great that there's so many community members. There's so many people that are so passionate and so enthusiastic about their son or daughter participating that it brings these emotions to the forefront. High school sports do matter to people. High school sports do matter to communities. And that's even another driving force for why we have to work so hard every single day to create these participation opportunities for these students.
One of the benefits of the decision that was made yesterday, actually, when I spoke with Section 3 Executive Director John Rathbun, he said that because of the cancellation of the spring state tournaments yesterday, he surprised me by saying, this is actually good for the section. And of course I had to ask, okay, why? Like that's not actually what I would have expected to hear. But he said that what it does is allow the section to move its sectionals later in June, especially if they even get more clearance to play later in the month, depending on regions. And of course, we're talking about spring here, and we haven't even finished with the winter season and then the fall 2 season. But and then he said that allows for more regular season games for all schools who decide to participate. And by all signs, and you can correct me in this part of too if you think differently, but it seems to me from everyone that I'm talking to that they're optimistic that spring sports will occur because of the outdoors ability. Baseball and softball, now we have the knowledge, whereas last March we were freaking out and not even, I watched videos of myself for stories I did without wearing a mask places, and I was like, how did we not know? But we learned about this over time. So a year later, 9 people spread out on the field, wearing masks, social distance, it's one ball that's getting passed around. You could clean that. All those things. I feel like it's optimistic that, and it's outside, that spring sports will happen. And one of the things that he said was that they'll be able to have a longer season. So was that at all part of the thought process, or is that just kind of a side effect that the section leaders now realize that, hey, they actually, whereas the state tournament, like you said, is a select group of people from already a select group of people that participate in sectionals, was that part of the decision making, knowing that the sections could move it later and then every school could have a longer regular season and more games?
That was really the catalyst for the decision, was to try to extend those seasons and try to give more flexibility to our sections and our schools. Yesterday, I saw some comments on social media about, well, this was driven by money or they're ignoring science. Absolutely not. It had nothing to do with the amount of money that was going to be lost as a result of having state championships. It also had nothing to do with us attempting to predict what the positivity rate was going to be in late June. Those two things weren't even discussed. What was discussed was giving the opportunity for our schools and our sections to have more flexibility in scheduling their spring season and really the 3 remaining seasons that we have to this school year.
And just working back real quick, why was this the moment? I can imagine we're always thinking ahead. You're always thinking ahead. Your colleagues are always thinking ahead. But why was February 3rd the right time? Again, almost still technically 3 seasons away, because it's winter still, and then fall too, and then spring. Why was now the time to make the decision about basically what would have been the final aspect of the 2020-2021 school year?
I've always said that, especially during this crisis, we're always going to give the information and we're going to distribute decisions and make decisions as soon as we possibly can. And in listening to the member schools and listening to our sections, that they're trying to put 3 seasons into essentially a 4-month time period. So by making the decision yesterday, gives those sections the ability to be more flexible with start dates and end dates of what is now the high risk winter season, fall 2, that can start as early as March 1st, but now could potentially start a little later because now you have some flexibility on the back end, potentially in late June. So really making the decision as soon as possible to give as much time for planning and scheduling as possible was a reason why I think yesterday's decision was the right time, because we realize nothing's going to change when it comes to our desire to provide flexibility to our schools and sections over the next month. The only thing that we could do is delay the decision and then really reduce the amount of time they have for planning.
As they say, with every action comes an equal and opposite reaction. So I feel like at the same time as you're allowing this planning, and ultimately that resulted in not having maybe a few schools, 11 most, right, or 12 from around the state participate in a state tournament. They all get to inversely have many schools play extra games during the regular season. And on the same note, I feel like this decision comes in the same week where we're figuring out about high risk sports. And I was wondering if you could just give a quick background on what your communication has been like over the past few months with the state governor's office and the state the state Department of Health, because obviously we know that your guidance has been well informed by them. We know that you've been talking with them at different occasions, and we've mentioned that, but what does that actually relationship look like?
Well, I mean, we've been communicating with state officials since the beginning of this crisis, and we rely very heavily upon a governmental affairs consultant to help guide us through this process. I don't know if people always realize that we are working with professionals when it comes to building a strategy to address this crisis. But I would characterize our communication with the governor's office and with state officials as very positive. But we also went into it, and I've always tried to keep this mindset of that there are so many priorities right now with this crisis. And we are not at the top of any priority list when it comes to or before vaccinations or testing or vulnerable population or opening schools or keeping schools open. All of those things had to be prioritized to a greater degree than getting high school sports back up and running. And rightfully so. I would hope everybody would agree with that. So sometimes people wanted to see, and they still want to see, state officials making decisions in a quicker fashion based upon the desire to get high school sports back up, but really not understanding that these same state officials that we're working with are charged with vaccination rollout and planning and scheduling of that major priority to get us back to an area or a situation in this state that we have the ability to have state championships and we have the ability to offer more for student athletes to participate in. We have the ability to get schools open 5 days a week. So I think the communication's been great. I think we've been trying to navigate this with them, with the understanding that there are many different priorities that need to be addressed.
How often would you be in touch with them or have some sort of call with them? Like what was the frequency or length of
I
those?
would say it's weekly, based upon whatever major crisis was occurring. As infection rates were increasing, I'm obviously not reaching out to any of those state officials out of respect for what they were dealing with. So I would say we were weekly communication with those state officials in an effort to understand, to make sure that they understood what our needs were and what our proposals were, to address as potential solutions to what they were dealing with and what we were dealing with.
I was speaking with both Cooperstown High School softball varsity head coach and Otsego County Chairman David Bliss the other day, and he was telling me that he might have an idea that the sports of the schools could actually help with the vaccination rollout if you have the teams and you can work it down the web of like school sections, schools, the leagues, the schools, the sports, the coaches, and the participants, and if you get them out almost in a web. I don't know. We'd have to think more about that. I'm no expert in how to set that up, but I'm sure that there are roles that each can help with there too.
Yeah, I mean, we're relying upon those experts in health to be able to determine those types of priorities or those types of initiatives when it comes to vaccination. And that's been another reoccurring theme is we're not going to step outside of our lane as the High School Athletic Association and start trying to provide health guidance to schools and communities. There are individuals that have doctorates in epidemiology. As my kids like to remind me, I'm not the type of doctor that helps anyone. I have a PhD in sports administration, so I'm not a medical doctor, nor do I ever claim to be. So I really want to say, let's rely upon those health experts that have the education, have the experience, and have the expertise to give us authorization and approval when they deem it appropriate.
So you're telling me you're a doctor, but not a doctor? That's it. I'm sorry. I invited the wrong person here.
That's the reality.
I thought I was getting other information. I have to throw out the rest of my questions because they were totally geared toward like, the other type of doctor, I guess, but whatever. Just two more questions to round this out. And then I have something new I want to try with a kind of almost rapid fire question session to cap it off. But I'm just curious, about how this feels. I think it's also a perspective people don't get to see is they see the decisions, then they understand how they were made, or they get the information on how they were made. But part of the challenge for you is when you're getting the information from different things. And in some ways, it almost seems like the state kind of surprised all of us with allowing high-risk sports and saying, okay, go ahead and your local municipalities can figure it out. Obviously, I spoke with John Rathbun. He was very optimistic. He had 11 letters ready to go for all the 11 county officials of Section 3. I hear that, obviously from your statements and tweets and everything, you were excited that, hey, this is a great day for high school athletes, you said, because we can work in the direction now of getting these high-risk sports like obviously Fall 2 football would be the biggest one coming up, plus the rest of the winter season for basketball and wrestling and all of those. But how do you feel about the decision? Were you just as surprised as maybe the rest of us were that after so many times of no update that the state said, okay, you can go now?
No, I think we're relying upon those officials at the State Department of Health to determine when was the right time. And keep in mind, we've learned so much over the course of the last 10 months. We've learned that the venue setting certainly matters. The duration of contact matters, how important it is to wear a face covering. So as learning has occurred, I'm thankful that the Department of Health has given the authority to those local health departments to make the decision based upon what's happening in their community. Because another thing that we've learned when it comes to sports, and this isn't just here in New York, but nationally, is that any kind of positivity rate in a youth sport program, whether it be 10 and 12-year-olds or interscholastic high school athletics, is a positivity rate when it comes to COVID on a sports team typically mimics the positivity rate of a community. So with all the learning that has taken place, I think now is the appropriate time to say, let the local health authorities, based upon what's occurring within their own community, to make that decision, working with those schools. Because another thing that we have to keep in mind is just because they've given approval doesn't mean that the school district is going to determine that it's feasible for every student to participate. In some cases, school districts aren't able to offer this opportunity for students right now, and that's perfectly okay. We as the High School Athletic Association want to be a resource for our schools when they determine it feasible to provide these participation opportunities.
So what does come next for the New York State Public High School Athletic Association? There's no more states to worry about for this school year. And obviously you've got a summer where you can, I'm sure, start focusing on next year's planning as the situation continues to evolve and we continue to learn, as you just mentioned. But what's next? I feel like this high risk sports conversation must be the top priority at the moment.
Yeah, it really is. And working with our schools to ensure that they are able to incorporate these high risk sports in a manner that's beneficial to the students. We're already planning for next fall, winter, and spring. These state championships that we host are not something that we plan a couple of weeks prior to the event occurring. The planning is already taking place for next fall. We're gearing up and we're excited to be able to host fall championships in the fall of 2021. And that's our focus right now. We have an awful lot of projects, an awful lot of things that are still ongoing. We still are involved in legislation. We're still involved in litigation. We're still involved in many different initiatives. And we're staying busy trying to prepare for the upcoming school year, but without also putting aside any of those projects and initiatives that are critical to the membership of our association.
And speaking of real quick, I've asked John Rathbun this before, gone in touch, Ben Nelson from Section 4, Executive Director. They didn't have anyone in their section participate in the fall sports, although they have had recently bowling and some winter sports take place. So I'll get to ask him this question once the winter season ends. But from what you've seen of the seasons that have been played, have they been a success?
I would characterize them as, yes, they've been a success, but I emphasize that they've been a success because of our athletic directors and coaches, because they have taken that guidance from the Department of Health and they have mandated it and they've implemented it and they've followed it letter by letter when it comes to face coverings, when it comes to screenings, when it comes to the spectators. So I commend those coaches and those athletic administrators for the job that they've done. Because of their work and because of their efforts, we were able to provide almost 30,000 student athletes this fall with the ability to participate in fall sports. Without them and without their dedication, we'd be in a completely different situation right now.
And so obviously the line is, with these guidelines that are out and following the rules, and as long as that is done, clearly we now have a case study, which we didn't before, that it works. And that, because I remember a lot of the discussion leading up to the fall season was, will this work? And some schools tested it out and it seems that it did, which should probably is probably informing your decisions and the association's decisions on how, no matter what the situation is, next fall might work out, that it's possible to do this.
There is always going to be inherent risk in participation, especially with the crisis that we're dealing with. But I think we have to continue to look at how can we mitigate those risks. And I think by following the guidance that we've been provided is certainly something that we stay focused on, and we're going to continue to follow, and we're going to continue to emphasize.
So wear a mask, stay socially distant when possible, avoid sharing equipment, or at least sanitize. All of those guidelines that are out there, and we have them. I know for my television station, everything's on cnyhomepage.com. I'll check with Nate for anyone watching if you want to follow his radio station's coverage. But continue with all the guidelines. They're working, is what you're saying, and hopefully that's leading to these opportunities for student athletes to get back safely and participate, which, like we said earlier, was the whole priority that you're focused on.
Definitely.
So let's do a rapid round here. This is new. I haven't done this before, but I think it's an interesting way to try and get just a few last questions in that are maybe a little more lighthearted too, at the end to cap it off. So first of all, what is something about your job that you think people don't necessarily know? I feel like we've gotten to know about your job more than ever during all of this, because it hasn't been so routine. So we've needed to learn, okay, what do you do and how are these decisions coming up and leading the organization? What is something you think that people don't know about your daily job?
Well, I just think maybe the amount of email that I get and that the staff gets at the association, it's sometimes overwhelming. That's why sometimes you'll get a response back from me very early in the morning or very late at night. But I think the amount of email that we receive is something that people don't necessarily realize, just the number that is coming in on a daily basis. I can just imagine how many emails I've gotten just since we've been talking during this short period of time.
Well, I'll have to let you go in a moment so that you could get to those. I know how many emails I have just because I leave them unread, like on my personal accounts and things like that, and that piles up. For how fast you've gotten, I feel so honored. Then I feel like if I email you, you've gotten back real quick, which is don't always expect from someone who's in charge of a whole state association. So I appreciate that. You've done a very good job at responding.
And one of the things about that email is, I'm one of those types of guys that likes to have as many or as few emails in my inbox as possible. So once I respond, I delete it out. My goal is always to have 0 emails in my inbox. Very rarely does that ever occur, but that's always the goal.
When this whole situation of the pandemic is behind us, or at least settled to a point where it's like under control and we're not constantly having decisions every 2 seconds that are really requiring so much effort to think about because we're in a routine again, I feel like we need to give you a vacation and just put the email, like no cell service, no Wi-Fi. All right, next question is, how often pre-pandemic, of course, did you travel around New York State? And where might you have visited if it was for rather the sections to meet, see the sections in action, or even just for personal travel?
Yeah, depending upon the time of the year, in September, there were weeks on end that I was on the road every single day. It just depends on the time of the year and what is taking place as far as state championships. Prior to the pandemic, I would say on average, I was on the road in various parts of the state 2 to 3 times a week.
All right, so 2 more questions. Of those travels, where is your favorite New York destination?
Lake Placid. I think it was one of the first places I went before getting this job. And I just think it's such a great area of the state.
I was going to make it to Lake Placid last year when the Clinton girls varsity ice hockey team made it and won the state tournament for the first time ever. But of course, snowstorms have some effect on travel in this, like we said, in this area of the country. I don't know if anyone else experiences that in New York, but it unfortunately prevented me from going. So I still have to make it there. But I'll take the recommendation if that's the best. And you've clearly been to a few places around the state. And final quick question, very important, and it's great that Nate is not here to debate this one. Is which section is better, Section 3 or Section 4?
I've learned a long time ago that I don't have opinions when it comes to our sections. I'm going to give you the political correct response in that I work the same for all 11 sections. There's no one section that's any better or any worse. But I do, in all seriousness, want to recognize the efforts of those section executive directors because working with them, I don't know if anybody really understands just how closely we're in communication on a daily basis, sometimes hourly basis with our section executive directors and the work that they do every single day. This crisis has been just as difficult on them, if not more difficult than it has been on myself and our staff here at the State Association. Well,
we know that you are working hard to work with them, and it's okay. Working hard for everyone. We understand. Maybe Section 3 is a little better than Section 4, but I cover both actually. So Nate's the expert for Section 4, and I'll take Section 3. So Nate and I will do rock, paper, scissors later to figure it out. But I know that we appreciate all your communication that you and Chris Watson and the others are doing. You've been very generous with your time here this afternoon. and definitely want to give the community a chance to hear these insights from you. Your time is very valuable, so thank you for lending some of it to me and to us here. And definitely I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. And as I tell all the people I've been Zooming with recently, seeing you on the field, hopefully at some point in the near future when we've got everything under control and can do that.
Definitely. And I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, because I realize the outreach that it has to various communities throughout the state. And I think when people are given the chance to see just how much work goes into each individual decision that we make, it might make them feel a little bit better that we're not just coming in to the office and trying to figure out what decision to make today, because I think that's completely not the case. We come in every day trying to figure out what's next, try to be proactive, and again, focusing on what's in the best interest of those students. We have the incredible privilege of working on behalf of every single year.
Well, we appreciate your time, and know that it's valuable to us, and hopefully we can share this around, and then they'll be able to hear those insights, because sometimes it's a lot of thought that goes into these decisions, or I should say always it's a lot of thought that goes into these decisions, and sometimes an hour long lacrosse section for understanding it. So we appreciate it.
Hey, sounds good. Thank you so much.